Air Vice Marshal Rich Maddison could be described as RAF man and boy through and through. He joined the Air Training Corps when he was a young teenager, and the RAF proper as soon as he finished school. He was commissioned in 1988 and trained to be a helicopter pilot in a variety of locations and roles, including instructing. He would later command a helicopter training squadron and an operational Puma squadron before converting to the Chinook and fulfilling the role of UK Chinook Force Commander. He later served as Deputy Commander of NATO Air Command in Afghanistan and is now the officer commanding of AOC 22 Group in High Wycombe, a post he has held since August last year. In recognition of his services, Rich was appointed an OBE in the 2011 Birthday Honours List. But among his other attributes, of which there are many, Rich is an RAF Senior Advocate for Social Mobility and the Defence Champion for non-religious and humanist personnel in defence. So, welcome to Humanistically Speaking, Rich, and thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed here today.
It's a pleasure, David.
I opened by saying that you were RAF through and through, man and boy, and that's pretty obvious, but what was it that inspired you to join the RAF from such a young age? Was there a family connection?
No, I've no family connection in the military, unless you go back to my grandfather, who served in World War I and died before I was born. My father grew up in the war, left school at 15, and there were no sort of close connections. But at school, I had a few friends that joined the Air Training Corps, which was a great outlet. I grew up in Hartlepool, and as soon as I was old enough to be allowed to join, which was 13 years and 3 months in those days, I joined. And thankfully, that sort of gave me all the opportunities, including the sort of first thing I ever flew in anything. Never been on a sort of a holiday before with my family. The first sort of trips away from home with sort of cadet camps. And I managed to get a flying scholarship, and after that was successful in getting the Air Force. So I owe a lot to the Air Training Corps in helping me sort of get into the Air Force.
So what did your first flight feel like if you were a youngster?
Oh, it was amazing, actually. It was it's a plane called the Chipmunk, which is a sort of, if you imagine a very old, they first flew, I think, about 1948. So they were the sort of the trainer that, you designed to lead someone into the Spitfire. It sort of had a tail wheel, a tandem cockpit. And you really did feel like you were flying in a bit of history. And you got to do aerobatics and other things. It was amazing. So really just a mind-blowing experience, and one that really inspired me. And later on, actually, in 1991, I think it was, I had a few months holding early on in my flying training. And I was able to spend those months flying Chipmunks, flying air cadets myself, one summer from Manston in Kent. And it was really nice to be sort of back in one of those aircraft and returning the favour.
Well, you've obviously got some very happy memories about your time in the RAF. I mean, what was the best thing about being in the RAF for you?
Oh, it's hard. Yeah, the funny thing is, it's quite often not individual events, but there's quite a sort of sense of being part of a great community. And in truth, you maybe feel that the most, or I felt that the most on that sort of frontline squadron, when you've been sort of working together, reliant on each other, but confident in each other as well. And then actually, and it's not all work. It's, at the end of the day, you sit down and you feel, sort of quite close to your colleagues. It's yeah, it's been a great thing.
Anyway, you're defence champion for non-religious and humanist personnel in defence. Forgive me, but is that a title in the same way as the President of Humanist UK, or does it have a practical ongoing application?
So, well, I think it is a title, but it's not like sort of Roger Hutton's one as the sort of the defence humanist president. It's really, if you like, providing a voice at a senior level for humanists and non-religious in defence, and that might be sometimes applying a little bit of pressure where you can sort of see something that's not quite as it should be. Sometimes it's just supporting the organisation, which is actually a lot of work, which is the Humanists and Non-Religious Defence, what we call HAND. And sometimes it is really trying to change the direction of defence in a way that you think is more appropriate to the sort of the way society is changing. So it's one of these things where I think of it as my hobby, in that I have quite a busy sort of day job, but that is the additional thing that I really enjoy doing, and it's quite good to be part of it.
Yeah, you raised some interesting points there, and I'll come back to that, adapting to the changing needs of society. But let me ask you, I mean, have you always been skeptic regarding conventional religion, or was there a moment of truth for you when you decided, no, I don't have a religious faith? How did it happen for you?
So I don't think there was a moment of truth. I mean, I was a choir boy as a child. You know, my mum had died when I was 1. My father was pretty much in a difficult situation. I had a happy childhood, but I was the youngest of 3 children, and my mother was a Catholic. My father wasn't. My stepmother isn't. And I think it was one of those things where there was a Catholic sort of part of my upbringing. You just kind of did those things. But at some point, I think in my adult life, it just wasn't something I really, believed in. And that probably just became a stronger and stronger feeling, and I probably was more opinionated about it over time. But it did take a while to get things changed, to formally change things from what's recorded, if you like, on the system. Partly because I think, in truth, you're not that bothered by it, but then you realise the importance of defence understanding what it has within it, and that's reflected accurately. And now, obviously, I'm sort of, everyone knows my position. I'm pretty open about it, but it has been a journey.
Since you mentioned that about records, before the interview started, we were briefly talking about people putting on their dog tags, even though they were humanists or atheists, that they chose to put Christian on their dog tags because it might work very much to their disadvantage should they be captured by say in Afghanistan, by the forces there. Is that your experience of many military people that did that? Because I am aware of military personnel who have said that to me, that they've had Christian put on their dog tags.
So I think there's no specific policy, but one of the aspects of training, if you're what's called prone to capture, so I've flown helicopters around Baghdad city centre as an example, and it's very sort of risky, sort of high threat environment, and there is the potential that you will be sort of put in an uncomfortable position. And so you do a lot of training about how to cope with, how to survive, how to evade, how to resist, and hopefully how to escape if you're unfortunate enough. But if I take it to the extreme, imagine if you were Jewish and you had Jewish on your dog tags, you would probably be very sort of wary of that in that environment. And so it's the type of thing that is briefed, that perhaps having no religion may make you seen as a lesser person than having some religion. But it's not a policy. It's just the type of thing that when people are discussing the practicalities of capture from the lessons that of people being captured, that it's something that is a factor for you. So, for example, you might, if you had Jewish on your tags, I think I'd be tempted to just get rid of them if I thought I was going to be captured, and just hide them, and just be sort of ignorant about it.
Yeah, I think in my situation, if I had humanists on my dog tags in a place like Afghanistan, I'd do exactly the same. I think it makes absolute sense. So let me ask you, you said that religion gradually became less and less relevant to you. So how did you first discover humanism? I mean, as a distinct thing from not having a faith? I mean, have you always been aware of humanism, or is it something that came to you by some discussion with someone or whatever?
So absolutely not. So I knew Roger Hutton, who was my predecessor in this role, quite well through work. We would occasionally in the Ministry of Defence, where I was working at the time, sort of engage with each other. I remember seeing something about a non-religious remembrance service and discussing it with him. And actually, I went along to one of those, representing the chief, as you'll sort of quite often do, because it was something I wanted to do. And sort of became, it was a much better experience for me than something that was based on something which is not aligned to my my beliefs.
So this was a Humanist Remembrance service, was it?
So it was the one run by Humanists UK, yeah, which is actually sort of, but if you like, organised by Defence Humanists. This year it was online, but at the time it was an in-person one. It was held at the Royal College of Defence Studies. There was the Humanist UK choir there, and there were readings that weren't based on religion. And so for me, it was a lot more comfortable. It was on the Saturday before the Remembrance Sunday. And actually, I quite enjoyed that. It felt more appropriate. And subsequently, Roger, when he was retiring, sort of got in touch with me and asked me about replacing him as the champion in defence. And that was a fairly easy thing to say yes to.
Yes, I was probably at that ceremony. Probably was there a couple of years ago. Yeah. Let me ask you though, has your non-faith ever caused you any difficulties or embarrassments? And I'm talking about in life generally, not necessarily the forces.
So I don't think I would call it sort of a particular difficulty, but when you work internationally with people, that they might sort of have a certain expectation of you. So I spent a lot of time in Kenya, and actually I remember someone asking me if I'd gone to church that day. And actually I responded, I learned a little bit of Kiswahili while I was there, and I responded with a phrase, Bado. So Bado means not yet, but eventually perhaps I will. And this was quite late in the day on the Sunday. And Bado is a phrase that if you asked a young lady if she had children, she wouldn't say no. She would probably say Bado, not yet, but hopefully I will. And that was my polite way of sort of saying, no, I haven't. But they knew exactly what I meant because it was too late for any church services that day. And we shared a smile. It was a polite way of me sort of explaining my difference. And you will come across some cultural things like that. But in general, within the British military, no, you might have to explain your position. But I've never really sort of had anyone that has, caused me an embarrassment and caused me discomfort. And so now if I'm invited to go to something which has a sort of religious service on it, I'll just politely say I would prefer not to. And there are exceptions such as Remembrance in sort of in a circumstance where there isn't really an alternative option. But in general, most people are understanding.
I think they are, yeah. It's certainly been my experience of people within the forces. Now, I know that you served in Afghanistan, which has been ripped apart by religious differences, as we all know, and that must have had some effect on you, at least the awful things that you must have seen there. But did any of your experiences within the forces help to develop your philosophical direction?
I think they probably, when you see things which are like that, they perhaps can make you more skeptical. And actually, for me, I wouldn't sort of single out Afghanistan as the sole one. I've served in Northern Ireland, I've served in Iraq, and I've served in Afghanistan in terms of operational theatres. I've served in many other places as well. But I did 2 years in Northern Ireland when there wasn't a ceasefire, and it is quite sad when the difference of faith, difference of religion is part of the source of the conflict there. There's clearly a lot more to it. But I think that does make you sort of feel rather sad that things are like that. And similarly, in Iraq, where you would see the Sunni and Shia sort of violence, between various areas, very sort of intense. Again, there's always more to it, and quite often religion can be the cover for, say, organised crime in somewhere like Northern Ireland. But it does, I think you'd be probably misleading yourself if it doesn't cause you to reflect on it.
Yes, I had some experience directly in Northern Ireland myself when I was asked to give a talk there. And quite a lot of people turned up in Belfast to hear me spouting off. And one of the questions I asked was how many of these people have been born in a Catholic family and how many have been born in the Protestant family. I asked them to put their hands up, and I was absolutely over the moon when I discovered it was about 50-50. Yeah. It's about 50-50 each side. And in my dealings with people in Northern Ireland myself, I felt that people are just sick of the violence that's come on. They've just turned their back on it completely. And humanism in Northern Ireland and in the South, of course, has been taking off. It's been very, very successful.
Yeah, I think there's certainly, there's been a big change, hasn't it? And there's been a big change in the Republic as well. The way the sort of, the various scandals have come out. But I served there in the 90s when there wasn't a ceasefire. I went back there later on, where really I was based there, but we were really just training to go to Iraq. And it was, even though there are still problems, I'm just so happy that it's a more settled, sort of province than when I was there previously.
Yeah, nobody wants to go back to the old days.
No.
Nobody, I'm sure. Now, just changing the subject slightly, I've never been in uniform myself, but it seems to me that religion is in many ways an integral part of military culture, and perhaps for obvious reasons. But there does seem to be an ever-increasing proportion of non-believers. So is that growing non-religious culture within the forces causing the central culture to adapt to these changing circumstances? I mean, clearly the acceptance within the forces fold, as it were, of defence humanists is a huge step in the right direction. But are there any other specifics that you can point to where progress is yet to be made?
Oh, I think there's always progress you can make. I mean, the important thing for us is that, we're not an island. We need to sort of represent the society we serve. And that means, we are underrepresented in terms of, people of other religions, what you may consider the sort of the BAME community, where there's perhaps a sort of higher proportion of different faiths in certain, certainly in the, in say, an Asian-based community. But I think we still have a long way to go. We are changing, actually, and it's been really positive when I've engaged with senior people, when we've talked about looking into, say, the provision of pastoral care, which is probably one of the biggest things, where we are just trying to turn that supertanker a little bit, get a change which we feel will be more appropriate. That what's not happening is we're not being sort of, dismissed, we're not being cast aside, we're being listened to. So the rate of progress is always something that you wish was better. But I think things like pastoral care, things about the way we offer alternative provisions. So, there's sort of the idea of when I joined, you probably had to go to that sort of Sunday church service or whatever, prior to a graduation. Those things are not obligatory in the way they were. So we've made progress, rightly so. And our demographic is increasingly identifying as non-religious as well. So probably over half of our 16 to 25-year-olds in our own statistics are identifying as non-religious, as an example. So that's our next generation that's filtering through. So even if the older generation, have a high proportion that are, say, of a Christian faith, we know that the next generation is different and we need to adapt.
And when you talk about pastoral care, is that a reference to just chaplains, or are there other services?
So we actually have a number of support services, but when we talk about pastoral care, we are principally, in that case, talking about the chaplains. So that the chaplains, if you like, are uniformed, they're deployable. So they are the ones that they're away with you on operations. Sadly, I've been on operations when I've, lost colleagues, lost friends, and then I've done that service, when the coffin has been loaded onto the aircraft. And at the moment, we don't really have an alternative to that in terms of a full-time provision of pastoral care. The person that you would talk to if you're having counselling, in a way that other armed forces, like say the Dutch, do, where they have a number of humanist chaplains, if you like, to provide support on that basis. So we are a little bit behind others, but that is one specific area that I think I'd welcome a change.
I'd like to come back briefly to your comment about, people being open-minded. I mean, one experience that I had with the RAF was to do the Air Training Corps. When I was given to understand the Air Training Corps, they swore an oath to the monarch and to God. And when I raised the issue of humanists and humanism within the ATC, I was quite surprised and quite gratified by the fact that the RAF immediately responded, and they did change. They gave the option for an alternative oath, which I thought was very, very positive.
And sometimes it just needs that prompt, and that's where, if I look at the work that HAN do, that's Humanist Non-Religious Defence, they will quite often give that prompt. We had one example where the Army's recruiting website, lists sort of, they support sort of, people from all religions, and someone at HAN pointed that out, and that was changed to reflect and beliefs, and actually they put a link to specifically to the sort of HAN support network in there as well. So sometimes I don't think it's it's not intent, it's almost just legacy that you just need to keep on top on and keep prompting and try and get things changing.
Yeah, just coming back to chaplains, this may not be so relevant to the RAF, but chaplains are amazing people, whatever their faith. If they're in the field and they're not armed, they're simply there to provide succor and support for people. You've got to admire them, and I know they're very, very respected within the armed forces. But what happens if there was? I can imagine situations where a wounded Christian might only be able to avail themselves of a humanist chaplain, or sometime in the future anyway, or vice versa. So has there been any consideration or consultation about this issue that you're aware of? I mean, I presume that different religious denominations have already addressed this problem. It must be a problem in some areas.
So this comes down to, if you like, the change in the pastoral care that we are there for. So our chaplaincy would probably argue that they are there to support people of all religions and beliefs. My view is that, and that's a personal view rather than a, if you like, an MOD view, but my view is that that's not reflective of our society. If that is the case, that it's not about their religion, then we should be recruiting people from a variety of religion and belief systems. So if it really isn't about religion, then we should open up the recruitment and be more representative of our society. And that's the discussion, if you like, which is at the heart of it at the moment. But ultimately, when you're away on operations, it is difficult because you might only have one or two chaplains out there. Of course, the Dutch have managed it. They have deployed humanist chaplains. I spoke to one recently. In fact, if you look at the Remembrance service, the Humanist UK Remembrance service that was online this year, you'll see there's a piece from a Dutch humanist chaplain who had deployed to Afghanistan. He's one of 39. So I think it can be done, but it also, we might just have to sort of reflect a bit more that, ultimately in my case, if my coffin were to be loaded onto a plane, or more realistically unloaded at the other end, then I would not want a Christian chaplain officiating at that service, and I would hope that my views could be reflected appropriately. What we don't have right now is a military equivalent humanist chaplain that could do that service for me. It would be one of our volunteers, if you like, who have already a role in the armed forces, and that's something I'd like to see changed.
Because there are celebrants in the military, aren't there? I think you mentioned a few.
There are, yeah, and actually they're really good, but I suppose the point is they have a day job as well. So if we are going to sort of equally support religion and belief, and you could argue how many humanists are there as opposed to how many people identify as non-religious, so there is a debate on the sort of numbers, but the bottom line is that I think we need to provide a greater level of support for people who would choose a funeral service that is not based on religion, because as a practical example, that's increasing across the whole of society, and I think for us as well.
You obviously think that defence humanists has an important role to play within the military. What do you think are the primary issues then that defence humanists needs to address as an organisation? So
obviously you've got Defence Humanists, which is the section of Humanists UK, and they are sort of great supporters. And through Roger Hutton, who's the president of that, we get really useful sort of engagement and support.
Yeah.
My principal dealing is with the part of defence which is internal to defence, if you like. So one of our sort of groups, which is the Humanists and Non-Religious in Defence, and they are really sort of quite special because they, through the two co-chairs, are working very hard. They're both celebrants. They both, are really on top of the knowledge and able to persuasively put a case for change. And so, if you like, I've come to this relatively recently. I bring rank, which sometimes can be quite helpful in sort of getting attention and the rest of it, but they bring knowledge, and knowledge is really useful in winning arguments. And it's the combination of the two that I think is what we're trying to work on at the moment.
Yeah, I know some of the people in Defence Humanists. I know that they're great people, and yeah. I'm sure they'll leave their mark. My next question was really about whether you think there's room for further integration of humanism within the military, but I think you've kind of answered that already. Unless, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
So no, I think there is. I mean, I think we should have. We probably have to start small, but we should have a group of full-time uniformed humanist chaplains within the armed forces. You know, paid in the same way as our sort of Christian padres and the rest of it are probably part of the same structure. You know, because it's all about pastoral support. I'd ideally like to see them focused at training establishments, so that when you enter the Army, Navy, or the Air Force, you could realize that it's okay, you know, to be non-religious, to be humanist. That if you are struggling with issues that you don't want to talk to a chaplain about, so for example, a Christian chaplain, you might be LGBT, you might sort of, you know, be pregnant and want to have a difficult conversation, you might be struggling with the concept of death and nothing afterwards. Those are conversations that I think people should know that they can have. And at the moment, there's no full-time provision for that. And I think on the basis of equality, that's what I'd like to see.
Yeah, you're RAF, obviously. Do you have any contact with the Navy and the Army in connection with humanism?
Well, in terms of hand, our co-chairs, one's Army and one's Navy. So we sort of, so that works really, really well. And Charlie and Neil are, like I say, I like to think that I work for them because they are the ones that are putting a lot of the effort in. And what I'm trying to do is be there and support them and do everything I can. So, but across hand itself, there's people from all services. There are civil servants in there as well. So there's a representation across defence that's sort of growing, and I think it works very well.
Yeah, I think you're doing a great job just being here, just talking to me, because it's a way of saying to everyone, it's okay. It's okay to be a humanist. Yeah. It's okay to say who you are. And that was the main reason why I was very happy to interview you and speak to you. Well, really, Rich, that's the end of my interview. This is one of my shortest interviews, but is there anything else that you would like to say to our readers or to humanists within the armed forces as a whole to finish off?
So I
think, no pressure.
Yeah, well, I suppose one, I'm very happy to be part of the community. It's taken me a while. Two, for those serving, that it's, you know, like you say, it's okay. You know, you should be able to, you know, be confident in your belief it is protected. I spoke at a conference recently of all of our sort of warrant officers, all of our senior non-commissioned personnel across defence, with the Chief of the Air Staff there, and said, you know, you might come across me as, you know, in my current role as Air Officer Commanding 22 Group, but you might also come across me as the champion for humanists and non-religious personnel in defence. So it's okay. It's not something that you should shy away from. It's on my biography. It is there. It actually provokes a lot of interest and discussion. And you will also sort of find people say, I hadn't really thought about what humanism was and the rest of it, and now I sort of feel like it's something that I can associate with. And for those outside of defence, I'd say have an open mind. You know, it's very easy to stereotype us as, you know, a bunch of, you know, I don't know, posh white males who sort of, you know, go to church every weekend and the rest of it. We're not. You know, I'm from a comprehensive school in Hartlepool. I've been in the Air Force 33 years. I don't believe in the supernatural, as I sort of prefer to put it, and that's okay as well. And we're increasing our diversity as thought, as well as our diversity in other areas, and just recognise that we are trying to change as well. And it is going to take a little bit longer than perhaps any of us would like, but there is serious intent about really sort of positive representation.
Rich, I think your comment about highly educated middle-class white males is so important. Humanism is there for everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone.
And I got two C's and a D at my A levels, so I have to sort of I can't rest anything on academic achievement.
Oh, well, I left a school that was known as a zoo, with very little. One of our teachers described it as a zoo, and with hardly any qualifications at all. So if I'm an example, then that's okay. People shouldn't be overawed, I suppose, about what humanism is about. It's not an intellectual thing. It's something that comes from the heart, really.
Yeah.
How you feel.
Absolutely. In fact, I did a podcast recently for what's called Inside Air. It's an Air Force podcast about social mobility, and actually very similar sorts of conversations came up there that, we are absolutely working on, and we've got a very positive message to sort of to say on social mobility. And I think it's just trying to get up to that level in other sort of forms as well.
Well, Rich, it's been an absolute delight talking to you, and thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming on stream, and it'll probably be transmitted in January.
Brilliant. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming along. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Humanistically Speaking is a volunteer-run online publication slotting in the gap between national humanist glossy magazines and Humanist UK's newsletter. We aim to create a platform that can bring humanist groups and individual humanists together, of course, but also to allow non-humanists to join in the debate. We want to explore topics of interest that any freethinker will be concerned about and offer informative, factual articles that encourage people to reflect upon, explore, question, and share ideas. We are in an exciting marketplace of ideas, and it is important that humanists from all stables of opinion have a voice. Humanistically Speaking is unique in offering this. Our remit is constantly developing, and by the start of our second year, we grew from a bi-monthly to a regular monthly issue. We've also expanded from email communication only to launching our own website and created our first values publication, From Atheism to Humanism. All of this has been made possible through your donations and your goodwill, and we're deeply grateful to those supporters among you who have donated already. But this is just the beginning. Our aim is a bold one. In addition to offering our support to National Secular Society and Humanist UK's campaign objectives, we want to share the humanist idea with everyone in society. Naturally, we want to celebrate rational thinking, open inquiry, compassion, fairness and justice, but we want to balance these good things with enjoyment and having fun, a sense of comradeship, and the thrill of just being alive. But to go further, we need financial security, and we're asking you to help us. If you approve of what we're doing, please join us on our journey towards the foundation of a national humanist magazine that lends voice to every rational and respectful opinion. We want to explain and celebrate what humanism is and share humanist ideas that we believe can do so much to improve the way we all live. You can help us to achieve these aims by setting up a standing order of £4 a month or whatever you can afford to Humanistically Speaking, or if you're not able to do that, think about giving us a kickstart boost by donating a one-off lump sum of perhaps £20. Our bank details are at the bottom of this screen, but if you prefer, please click on the link below that will take you straight to the appropriate place on our Humanistically Speaking website and follow the guidance given. Every donation will be acknowledged with a message of thanks from us. One last thing before you go, do spread the word with your friends, because Humanistically Speaking is there for everyone. There are also many potential humanists out there who already share our values and yet don't know we exist. There are also humanists who don't have a group nearby and who might be feeling like a lone voice in their communities. We would like to serve them also and play our part in breaking down any sense of isolation. We're doing all we can by committing our time and energy. Please help us with your goodwill and donations and join us on this journey. Thank you.